Welcome to the voices of transparency and excellence. We're not pivoting, the world is spinning like a top. Let's stop, figure things out, get some answers. Come with us on this ride. Warm regards, Rick and Judi.
Welcome to our podcast series where we address crucial topics impacting our campus and community. I'm Judi Brown Clarke.
And I'm Rick Gatteau, and today we have Marcy McGinnis with us. She's the founding Associate Dean of Stony Brook School of Journalism and the former Senior Vice President of News Coverage for CBS. Marcy is currently a career coach and media trainer. Welcome, Marcy. We're so grateful to have you be part of today's episode.
Great to be back on campus.
Great. And Judi and I are extremely excited about today's conversation because it's so timely.
Yeah.
So let me begin with the broader question about the First Amendment. And obviously, freedom of speech, freedom of the press is a cornerstone of journalism. Take us back a bit to when you were in your role at CBS News and maybe talk about that context and how it has evolved over time since you've been in that role and then where you see it today.
Okay. I don't think the core journalism has changed much. When I was back there, some people call it the glory days, but when I was young, the older people used to say, "Oh, you missed the glory days." So everyone thinks their era was the glory days. But the fact of the matter is that when we were there, it was all about kind of our North Star was getting it right, being accurate, making sure we had the facts right. It was also about being first if we could, but the pressure to be first wasn't as great as it is now. And so it was much more about being as accurate and comprehensive as you could. Make sure you got it right. The pressure to be first was enormous. I can remember one time when, if I can tell a quick anecdote, I can remember one time we had word that Bob Hope had died. And ABC was saying Bob Hope had died. And we didn't have it. And I kept calling the LA Bureau and saying, What happened? Come on, get it. It's got to be true. The ABC said it. It's got to be true. And our people kept saying, we don't have it. Or our sources aren't saying it. And it turned out in the end not to be true. And so that was one of those times when I had to trust my people and their sources, because had I rushed because other people were saying it, it would have been wrong. So our North Star was getting it right and going from there. Mm.
So it's so interesting that you framed that response in being right, because this question is going to challenge that. While freedom of the press is protected by the First Amendment and crucial to a democracy, the government is held accountable by the people. So truth matters. However, lately it seems like people don't seem to entirely believe that anymore, and nor do people seem to trust what's being told to them. And so can you talk a little bit about some of that divisiveness, and, what may have been kind of the root of how you just talked about, really the trusted sources, reputable trusted sources, to now people not believing what's being said?
Well, I think a few things have happened. In the past, there were trusted news sources, 3 news sources. Everybody got their news from ABC, NBC, CBS News. They began to grow, and, there were other trusted news sources. Now, the media landscape is flooded with information, and not just news sources, but information sources. And not only that, but people tend to go to places where their own beliefs will be reinforced. So if you believe something, you tend to go to a place that's going to tell you you're right. And so it's our job as journalists to figure out how can we get these people to trust us, because trust is really what this is all about.
Yes.
And so if we can build trust with the audience, and by doing that, I mean by finding the facts, by not reporting the opinion. There's too much out there is all about opinion. And consumers need to be part of this. Consumers should be part of news literacy, of figuring out who can I trust, how can I figure out if what I'm being told is true or not. Where did they get their information? So we have kind of a double responsibility. The journalists have to still be curious. They have to still be smart, ask those tough questions, and try to break through that cacophony of noise that's out there. People masquerading as journalists when really they are information gatherers.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, to follow up on that, as you were speaking, I was thinking back, as you said, the three major networks.
Yeah.
And I remember the only time I recall hearing or seeing an opinion on TV would be an editorial at the end of the broadcast. And, today it is so mixed because you have news sources that I think are aiming to continue to try to be as objective and fact-based as possible. But then there's so many opinion so that there, and I wonder what your sense is from the public's perspective. Do they see the difference in that? It just seems very murky, the world of media now that was once defined as so, again, fact-based, accurate reporting, and the opinion is just, it's everywhere now.
And I think the proliferation of cable started that because what happened like at places like CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, in the beginning when CNN, for example, was first started, it was very much an all-news channel. They were spending a huge amount of money to go all over the world to cover the news. News is very expensive to cover. My budget alone was close to $300 million for CBS News. I mean, that's a lot of money. Every time you send somebody out the door, it's thousands of dollars. So what happened was, in order to save money, they turned shows into talk shows because it costs nothing to get two people into a studio to talk about the news. So a lot of these cable stations are talking about the news as opposed to reporting the news. Now, they also do report the news, but then they spend an inordinate amount of time talking about it. And so what happens with the audience is the audience will go to the place where they like what those people are saying. So if you're conservative, you're going to go to Fox, and if you're liberal, you're going to go to MSNBC, and you're going to hear your own biases or your own, what you believe just back into your echo chamber. So I think a lot of that's what's happened over the years is I try so hard to tell people, please continue to watch the three network news shows because they are still kind of the ones that are still doing that, what you described earlier, which is go out, cover the news, tell us what happened, give us some context, give us a transparency, and, help us understand what we need to know in order to make smart decisions in our lives. That's really what our responsibility is. And people sitting around a table talking about the news and their opinion about the news. And I love when they say, I don't like people who give their opinions, but, and next thing you know, they do.
Right. Well, and it kind of leads to the accountability, very similar to when you were talking about the story and there was a lot of fact finding going on because that was the protocol. It wasn't just like, I got this news information. It's like, do you have a trusted source? How many people did you source this from and so on. So there was safeguards that maintained their integrity, which then made you a trusted source. Okay, we've drifted away from that. And so we don't say disclaimers. And we also name things, as you just stated, we name things as news, not opinion of news, or we're just going to have, we're just going to have a conversation, but things are being presented as fact-based. And so I think for listeners and people that, they're looking for confirmation bias, but sometimes they're going into news feeds and actually coming out with not the intentionality of thinking a certain way, but it was so framed factual.
Well, I think that people are still interested in finding out what happened, why it happened, and how does it affect me. I mean, that's really what the regular citizens want to know.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's tough to paint this whole landscape with one brush.
Sure.
I don't think we can say there is no perception of straight news anymore because the perception is that everybody is going to find their own news. And there's all these influencers and there's citizen journalists and people who aren't paid to do this and have editors to make sure their facts are right. But I think that there are still many, many reporters out there who are doing, quote, the Lord's work. I mean, their local TV news is a great example of fantastic. It's one of the top news sources where people trust their news. They trust their local news. They're going out, they're finding out what's happening at the local level, and they're reporting it. And the same thing at the network level. I think what's happening is people are confusing the opinion with the reporting. And so if people can break through, or if news organizations can help break through the opinion stuff and just get down to this is what happened and here's what it means. It's not just enough to say there was a fire. Okay.
Yeah.
But what else? Well, you know what? It destroyed an entire block. It destroyed this much in the economy. These are how the people are rebuilding. It has so much more to it. So I think that what we have to worry about is, are there reporters out there who are good investigative reporters?
Yeah.
Are there people out there who want to do this for a living? They're curious, they're smart, they're asking difficult questions, they're holding power to account. Those are the people that we need in journalism now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Marcy, can you talk about when you were at CBS, what was the nature of the relationship between the news and the White House, for example, and the President of the United States? Because obviously it's evolved over time, and the landscape has changed in many ways. I mean, honestly, Donald Trump has used the term fake news to kind of become a mantra. I guess, what was it back then? And then also, what should it look like? What does a healthy relationship between the press and the White House look like?
That's a great question, because what it should look like is that the press has a job, and the job is to find out what's going on, to hold power to account. The government has a job to defend their positions and to defend their policies. And so the press is asking smart questions. The government can tell you what they want to tell you and keep something secret. In terms of when I was there, there's always been an adversarial relationship with the press. They'll always, in the Nixon era, they were calling up to say, don't report this thing about Watergate. It doesn't matter. It's a version of fake news. They didn't say the words fake news, but they said, it doesn't matter. It's nonsense. It's not true. And so that's why you needed Woodward and Bernstein, and you needed other reporters like that to go in and figure it out, because they're going to try to defend what it is they're doing. And our job is to break through the noise and break through whatever they're saying to find out, is that actually true, and is that actually the way it's going to affect people's lives? So there have been times when the White House would call and ask us not to do something. I remember when the Unabomber was hiding, and the press had found out, CBS had found out where he was, and they called up, the FBI, I think it was, that called us up and said, we're begging you not to say where he is because we're about to get him.
Yeah.
And so we didn't. And, there are times when we will work with, we're not going to go rogue.
Yeah.
And then there's other times when they were asking 60 Minutes not to show those pictures of Abu Ghraib. And 60 Minutes held back for a while, but then they finally were like, no, we're showing them. So there's always been that push-pull, which is healthy in a democracy. The government should not try to control the press. They can criticize the press, but they cannot control the press, and that's where you get into trouble, when they start trying to control it.
So speaking of leadership matters, and when you talk about, some of the tension, and you reference the show 60 Minutes. And so a show that's considered an icon of broadcast, like there's just certain shows that just anchor how people get their news across generations. And CBS News as a whole has had a major leadership change. And so many of the things that you just talked about is kind of a top-down. So everything in the organization may be a top-down culture. What, in your opinion, do you think about, and this isn't criticizing who's in leadership, but what do you think is going on with some of these leadership changes, particularly around CBS?
I think there's a few things going on. There's political pressure. There's business pressure, which is nothing new.
Yeah.
Business pressures have been coming at us since the 50s. So that's not new. What is new at 60 Minutes and at CBS is any kind of influence in the editorial product. And that's where people are worried there, because 60 Minutes has been held up. You said it yourself.
Yes.
It's been the epitome of the kind of journalism that the country has learned to trust. The ratings for 60 Minutes over 50 years, it's in the top 10. It's an amazing, It's an amazing broadcast.
Yes.
And the reason it is because of the independence that they've been able to have. The management at CBS didn't interfere with 60 Minutes. It's not to say that they let them run rogue with anything. They didn't. They're highly, highly competent and highly respected journalists on that staff. So what's worrisome are the business pressures and the political pressures going to influence the product.
Yeah.
And the people that are working there now, the people that have been there and are still there, are determined to have that be the case. It's to have it continue. Now, whether there's pressure from the current leadership is yet to be seen. There was some pressure, according to Sharon Alfonsi and Cecilia Vega. They've both gone very public with this, and Scott Pelley has gone public. So they're claiming that there has been, but now the new management is saying that they're not going to interfere editorially. So we can only wait and see. Yeah. What I'm just hoping is that the public gives it a chance to see, because I'm afraid so many people are saying, I'm not ever going to watch 60 Minutes again. And if the staff is able to continue the great work that they do, it will be a shame if it doesn't get the audience.
No, and I think as a regular viewer, I have the question in my mind too about a level. What's the appropriate level of autonomy? But fact checking to get the story right. You mentioned before about the editorial process. In the traditional format of 60 Minutes, who is traditionally involved in the editorial process? Because obviously there is, if you're the reporter or correspondent on a story, I'm sure there are other people sharing. Have you looked at this angle?
Yes.
Like, who are the people doing that? And what has changed in terms of the involvement of outside people in that process?
Well, over the many years of 60 Minutes existence, and I didn't work at 60 Minutes, so I can only tell you from the hard news side what it was. A lot of people are involved in the editorial process. So you have an executive producer, you have executive editor, you have the leadership, which are all involved, the correspondents, you've got many producers, associate producers. Whenever there's a story suggested, whenever there's a story produced, there are multiple layers of fact-checking. Lawyers are involved to make sure that there's nothing that is untoward in terms of the legal side. Constant question. I mean, I was an executive in one screening for 60 Minutes one time, and I was blown away by what happened after the screening of the piece. Mm-hmm. It was the lights came on in the room, and everybody had a script, and everybody was talking about, this isn't, why did you say this, and why did you say that, and I don't think these words are correct. So there's a lot of people who are involved in this. It isn't a correspondent and a producer deciding anything.
Yeah, right.
It's a lot of people, a lot of layers.
Right. Do you think that the media, again, I think the criticism generally of broadcast and media overall is it's too liberal. And I wonder, again, as a viewer of 60 Minutes, I've never considered that when I've watched the show. And so I wonder, do you see an evolution of liberal versus conservative media, and whether or not, are we living in a system or bifurcated kind of media world with this? Because I just, maybe I'm just this average viewer, I don't often see the distinct, I don't think that even after, for example, a presidential debate or interview or conversation, I'll see somebody slam on social saying, well, you're a liberal anchor. And I've never viewed it as that. Like, I just thought they're asking the tough questions.
Well, again, people have become so
cynical.
They've become cynical, but they've also become so wrapped up in their own ecosystem and their own echo chamber that no matter if you just say the word CNN, they're going to say that's liberal. Or you say the word Fox and it's going to be conservative. So it's a shame that people aren't just listening. Is that a good question? Did I ask a good question? Caitlin Collins was interviewed the other night, and I was listening to her, and she said, when I ask a question, I'm just asking a question on behalf of Joe and Martha at home. I'm just trying to figure out, what do people want to know without spin? So, but when someone sees her working for CNN and they are inclined to label an organization liberal or conservative, then we're in this situation where everybody is just labeling everybody and then refusing to listen. And that's where you have to break through. Journalists have to break through that to have the viewers understand you can trust us. We don't have an agenda. I think the press has often been called liberal because the press is about finding out what's going on. And oftentimes what's going on is, poverty and, people... social issues that is news. It's important information for people to know so that they can make decisions on who they're going to vote for if they're depending on the policies. So, I think that it's unfortunate that we've gotten to a place where people are labeling everybody as something and then refuse to listen to anybody else. And two people can say we're at the exact same press conference and their audience is hearing something different.
Yeah. I know you're not missing being the associate dean in the School of Journalism, because I think what would probably be incredibly challenging right now is a classroom full of new emerging journalists trying to figure out how to be great storytellers. And there was a phone interview with Jake Tapper on CNN's Sunday show. And the president made a statement, and it was, we're trying to have CNN go on a normal path, and we'll do that. What does a normal path mean? And then I think the difficulty of that, and let's talk to like our emerging journalists, even citizen journalists. People want to be good storytellers. They want to give good information. We want to be able to, get this information and make decisions, choices, or just be informed. What does a normal path mean? And then how do we think that, how fluid is that to who's in the administration?
Well, first of all, I don't think any administration, Republican or Democrat, should be deciding what is, quote, a normal path for journalism. In our shop, journalism, a normal path for journalism was finding out what's going on, asking questions, being able to be transparent about it, back it up, find out what's going on and be able to put it into context and make sure that you have layers of people making sure that what you're reporting is correct. So normal to one person might be abnormal to another, but certainly a government shouldn't be telling the press what's normal. What's normal for us was making sure our reporters were doing their job. And their job was to ask tough questions, provide context, and make sure that it was going to be accessible to a large audience. Bringing us to the journalism students of now, I'm actually excited about the students that are coming into journalism now, because not only should they be taught the skills, they're going to be taught shooting, writing, editing, all of the reporting, storytelling, all of those skills are not any different than they were many years ago. What is different in what they're going to have to learn is all the different platforms, because we've evolved from, television and print. We're now in digital. We're in social media. And so they're going to have to learn how to sort of produce their news for those different platforms. And I think that's pretty exciting, as long as they can understand that there's a lot of people getting their information from those platforms. And we have to teach the students how to report you don't report on social media the way you did on a broadcast. You don't put a 2-minute broadcast on social media. Nobody's going to watch it. So I think it's an exciting time for students to be in the journalism school now. I'm excited about it. And I think that it's just something that they're going to have to do differently than we did.
Sure. Can we talk a bit about media ownership? And some of the conversations we had earlier around 60 Minutes, I think, evolved because of the ownership of, Paramount owning CBS. And there's now been the discussion about Paramount taking over Warner Brothers, which is the parent company of CNN. And now there's an antitrust lawsuit. Just wanted to get your perspective on what is the role, or what should be the role, of the parent organization as a corporation, as a business, related to any media companies that are owned, and where do you draw the line in terms of their engagement, and what should this look like in the world we're in today, knowing that it looks like a lot of consolidation is happening too that might affect competition and whatnot.
And a lot of this isn't new. When the days when Bill Paley owned CBS, that was one single owner owning CBS, but now it's come to these different corporations buying, people are merging, people are taking over different organizations. It's a business. So we all recognize that there isn't, money to be spent all over the place. Right? It's a business. Where I believe it has to draw the line is when the parent company decides it's going to interfere with the editorial side of the news gathering. Because that's where their job, in my opinion, is to provide the budget, to give us the money, to tell us, this is how much you have, this is what you can spend. We're not naive. We know that there isn't money flowing like water. By the same token, there shouldn't be strings attached to the money, in my opinion. There shouldn't be, we're going to give you this and you're going to report our way. So that's what's a little bit scary in this environment where people think, well, if Paramount, who's friends with this one, is going to influence the news gathering and the news reporting and the storytelling, what can I trust? And it all gets back to trust. That's what we want the audience to do. They want to trust us. So if the organizations, the companies that own the company, that own a news division, understand that there should be independence in that editorial news gathering operation, then we'll be okay.
So let's talk a little bit about access. In your opinion, what are the effects when the press corps is being denied access to newsmakers, to Congress, to the Pentagon? If you don't have access to do the interview, to get the information, how does that affect your ability to be the storyteller?
I'll go back a minute and say that it really affects the audience because they're the ones that now don't have the information that they need to be able to make decisions about, for example, whether they're in favor or against this war. So denying access to reporters is like telling the viewer at home or the listener at home or the consumer at home, you don't matter. We're telling you what we want to tell you. And that's government interference with the editorial process. So look, it's a natural thing for there to be push-pull with the government. And they don't want certain things told. And the role of the free press is to find out what's going on and to tell the citizens so that they can make decisions. And when the Pentagon denies access, in the end, they're the losers. The audience is the losers, but, their story isn't being told. All these great stories about, the soldiers and what's going on with them and their families. The audience is losing that perspective. And there's a lot of good things to be told about stories coming out of the Pentagon, along with the facts that, are tough to hear. Yes. I mean, there's death and there's manipulation of the facts. So we have to get out of that. I mean, the government has got to understand that the First Amendment guarantees freedom of press, and the freedom of the press should be paramount within the government. You know what? No government official likes the press.
Yeah.
They just don't. I don't care if it was a Democratic president or a Republican president. They don't like being held to account when there are things they don't want other people to know.
Sure.
But it's our job to do it, and it's their job to defend their actions and to defend their policies. So it's the consumer that's losing in that. Look, the reporters are smart enough to find sources.
Yes.
They don't have to be sitting in the press room at the Pentagon or in the White House to find their stories. And they often don't. But at the Pentagon, they used to find stories by having somebody walking by them and being willing to talk.
Yes.
And now it's just harder. But good reporters are still finding out the information.
Yeah.
For today's journalism students, with everything we've already discussed, plus additive technology, AI, social media evolution, we're just in an interesting place today. What would you give either advice to an aspiring journalist, what are some important parts of, School of Journalism that you think should be core to the teaching of today's journalists?
Well, certainly the skills that I mentioned earlier are key. So they still need those skills. Learn how to report, learn how to write, learn how to edit, learn how to shoot, learn how to do social media, learn how to get your information on all the different kinds of platforms. So those kinds of hard skills are important. The softer skills about being dogged and being a leader and wanting that curiosity, having that curiosity to go out and find out what's going on and then be able to tell other people about it. It's a great job. I mean, your job is to go find out stuff and then tell other people about it. How much fun is that?
That framing. That's a great frame. Wow.
Yeah, it's a great job. And it's a highly respected job, and it should be highly respected, and it's a responsible job.
Yeah.
Because it's in your hands about whether you are getting across the information to the people. And again, the storytelling is just so much fun. You can go and you can find a person who's being affected by the news. So if a tornado has happened, you're not just going to shoot video of the tornado and the aftermath. You're going to find that family and find out if FEMA's helping that family and find out how they're going to rebuild and making a connection with your audience. And I would tell my journalism students, make a connection. Don't just tell me what's going on. Make a connection. Tell me why it matters. So that I think is a big deal.
Well, I just got to add, I love you. You and Judi both use the word storytelling, and I think that is such a powerful word. And that to me, the opposite end of it is the world we live in is of sound bites, and I think it's the storytelling part that just. Whether it's listening to a podcast or watching on TV, there's something powerful about like understanding the context and there's an emotional connection to a piece that I think sometimes we're missing. That's why CBS Sunday Morning. Well, I think about that as a brand and a show that. The human aspect of like us being human beings, there's so much emotional connection in the way. And I know it's produced in such a creative storytelling way that I think we're losing some of that with the echo chambers, with everything else and the sound bites we live in.
60 Minutes and CBS Sunday Morning are two of the premier storytelling platforms. I mean, they're just beautiful. And they're in different ways. Sunday Morning is just, you hear stories about the arts, and you hear stories about things that you never even dreamed that you would be hearing about on a Sunday morning when you're, sipping your coffee. It's just wonderful. And 60 Minutes is like the premier storytellers. Yes. And sometimes their storytelling, the video you're watching is a close-up of somebody they're interviewing. You're like, how did I come away from 13 minutes with a story that had limited video? They don't do a huge amount of video in that show, which is kind of amazing but the way they tell a story is so powerful that it makes you just want to come back for more, which is why the audience kept coming back for more for 60 in one way and Sunday Morning in another way. But identifying those students who have that knack to tell stories and not just report the news is golden.
And I think the reward of not the sound bites versus the story. And what I love about 60 Minutes, it talks about what connects us, because in those stories, you realize that whether you're a world leader or you've accomplished something or you've navigated some atrocity, you realize that, that could be me. Or that person, we connect on so many, we're more alike than different. And so I think, and there's something that you touched on earlier, and the Gallup polls say that the American confidence in mass media is at a low at 28%. But there's something that you talked about earlier that we're doing very well, and that's the local news. And we understand kitchen table issues. But is there something that our mass media can be inspired by with the local news and really connecting to communities that you think would rise that level of confidence in mass media?
Yes, I think that the reason local news is so popular and so trusted is for the reasons that you just mentioned. It's because people know those reporters. They see them in the supermarket, and they trust them. And I think that our job in the network and in other outlets beyond local news, take a page out of that book.
Yeah.
Find the people that the news is affecting and find those stories. And so the sound bites, they're fine, but they often just reiterate what the reporter just said. The reporter says 10 people were dead, and then the soundbite says a lot of people were dead. And it's like, okay, I think I just heard that twice. Yeah. So I think that if more outlets would go into communities and towns and places that are in Middle America. CBS does a series called The Eye on America.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful series because they go into Middle America and they find out how people are being affected by whatever policies are being put in place.
Yeah.
And so people are learning, this policy affects us. And that, to me, is really important. And being there, think about the Minneapolis story.
Yes.
Just being there and seeing those crowds coming out in the dead of winter in protest of ICE, but then hearing individual stories, individual people, that's what connects other people, is hearing your story. We got the facts, now tell me the story.
Yes.
Well, to wrap up today, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with us?
My final thoughts are that I am optimistic. I'm optimistic that journalism will continue, that we will always have people who want to find out what's going on, verify it, tell you how they did it, be transparent. It's a new thing now. Tell us how you found that out, and tell me a story, and tell me why it matters, and how it's going to affect my life so that I can make informed decisions. All we want is an informed citizenry so that they can make decisions to make this country even better than it is.
Great. Well, Marcy, thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise. And I just want to add to, I'm so happy that Bob Hope is still alive.
He's not.
I know, I'm joking. Well, no. I'm just joking with you, but I love that part of the story, so I had to end with that.
And I share, thank you, because we know there's always a story, and every story deserves a storyteller and an audience. And so we absolutely hope our listeners find these discussions informative and empowering. Thank you to our guest for her valuable contributions.
And for now, I'm Rick Gatteau.
And I'm Judi Brown Clarke, and thank you for tuning in.